I am often asked by my father why it is that I pick the most unlikely men to be heroes. I think he thinks it is a kink in me. I know, because she once told me so. Tact not being her middle name. I know Aphrodite thinks it is because, as I am a holy virgin, I get my kicks not from sex, but from power. And there is nothing like that sense of power you get when you take an unlikely hero, say Odysseus, a man who left for himself, takes 20 years to sail a route that is well known, that would only take all his fellows a month or more. Such dross then, and to turn them to whispering in their ear to gods. And of course you have all the fun when the hero thinks that it is them that is doing all these great deeds, and starts to ignore your advice of just dropping them, like Bellerophon, thrown out from heaven. So Aphrodite thinks I get high upon power. Now I do not say it is not the case. I know that Hera has a different theory. She thinks that I always promote the boys, to remind my father that in transcending their mortality, that if I had been a boy, I would even now have castrated him and overthrown him. And I do not deny its truth, although I would say, in the case of Odysseus, I was always very fond of Penelope. She who had been my priestess, I wished her well, and so I looked after her husband. Be that as it may, this child, Zeus, my brother, was different. He had such charm that even Diana was moved by him, that even his stepmother, in the end, smiled in her orchard. And all the gods, in their own different ways, thought highly of him. I remember that last task. The tyrant of Tyrins, that popinjay, had been smiling to himself, some dark whisper. I think he had gone to the altar of Iris, she who causes discord in heaven. And it was Iris who suggested the idea, for it was no words of mine, and no mortal would be so audacious to think it. But when the hero came before him, I remember the tyrant said, I wish to see Cerberus unharmed. Go into the underworld and stay there. Bring Cerberus back to me. And once again it was clear that the tyrant was saying, go kill yourself. And the hero, not saying anything, stalked out. And then I whispered in his ears. I taught him of the mysteries. I sent Hermes to be a priest, and Hermes taught him of the deep mysteries of life and of death, of how there is a cave far in the deep Peloponnese, where the sea beats down again and again, and at how the dead come there and pass into the shadow, and that the living might pass only once a year, when the first moon of autumn rises in the sky. At that moment, when the days begin to shorten, and poor Persephone goes back to her joyous husband with glad heart, leaving them the halls of her mother. That day then, when all the world begins to think of winter, a hero, if he was brave enough, as the moon rose in the sky and the sun westward, might follow Persephone down, not lighting candles, but the sandals that shone like stars. And the hero seemed to understand what I said. And then Hermes taught him of the sacrifices he must make, the black goat blood poured on the high altar, the burning of rosemary and of sage, and of how the dead would flock on that day when they all run down to the kingdom of death below, and how at last Persephone would take one last drink of the black blood ere she went to her husband's kingdom. And like the hero he was, he listened. He went to the Peloponnese, made due sacrifice, burnt it, and Persephone caused a sign of her approval. The moon she moved, so that it eclipsed the sun, and all the world in that autumn mist was plunged into darkness. And in that other light, Hercules could see bright the stars, but brighter yet the sandals of Persephone. And he followed those sandals, not knowing where they went, hardly heeding that they climbed through rock and stone, and that at last, so deep were they, that the eclipse must have passed, but they were still in dark, as down and down and down he went, and the rock burnt hot and became sharp and angular, so he could hardly touch it. And in his ears he heard the whispering voice of 1,000 demons and 1,000,000 dead, down there, deep. And how he ignored them, for Hermes had told him he must listen to no voice until he came to Hades at the last. And of how they rounded a corner, and suddenly he saw, sometimes there are heroes who you hate, that because they're the son of some god who was your old enemy, you must favour. One for such was he. There was his old shipmate, Theseus, and Theseus his pal, with whom he had gone to Hercules on quest in the lands of the Amazons. And together they had been the ones who had tried to steal Hippolyta, and poor Hippolyta had died. And then they had tried to repeat the task in spring, to capture Persephone as she came out from her mother's to her mother's halls, and how Hades had given them carven stone thrones, and put snakes about them, and said he would give them a feast, and how they had ate then, the king there in the kingdom of the dead, in their high thrones. And how, although they saw Persephone passing, those thrones had held them fast. For 6 months held them, while the snakes that Hades had put on their feet had turned into writhing serpents, and then just old vines climbing up the stones that they were fast becoming. And at last Hercules, who had been following fast the footsteps of Persephone down, stopped, for Theseus could still speak. "Save me," he said, not thinking what would happen to my Hercules. And Hercules, being a hero, stopped. And he looked at Theseus up and down, and saw that his back half and his buttocks had become stone. And he tried to pull him out, and he could not pull, and he could not pull. So he deployed that divine strength that the great god gave him, and he pulled Theseus out. And only Theseus's buttocks and bum remained upon the throne. And then there was a deep sound, like a thunder, deep down in hell. And then Theseus said, "Thank you. Can you do the same for my friend?" But Hercules looked at the friend, and the friend's eyes were alive, but his companion's heart was already stone. And then Hercules said, "I do not know what will happen to you, Theseus, but head up and run fast." for the deep noise that might have been thunder in the depths, or alarm carried on. But it was Hades, my uncle, laughing, for he knew that although Theseus had escaped, his companion, who was the worst in the crime, the plan to steal Persephone as she came out of the caves, he had been caught, held fast for all of time. He would become part of the writhing mouth of hell. And Theseus's guts and buttocks would ever remain in the kingdom of the dead. And that meant that Theseus' digestion was already as one dead, and Hades could wreak what will he wanted with it, turning the very bowels of Theseus into a living torment if he must, and he must. And so he laughed, and so Theseus ran. And it was that laughter that finally guided Hercules right down, until he came to the very mouth of the Styx, and the great dog lay before him, and the dog rose up all its hackles out. But Hercules was nimble of foot and jumped over it as it snapped its 3 heads at him. And then he came to the shining castle, the great palace of my uncle, where my cousin had just come home, and all the house rejoiced. And Persephone, seeing then her distant relative Hercules there, took him before my uncle and pleaded his case, saying it is not his fault. I know this king, this tyrant of tyrants. And Hades said, it is true, I understand what my wife has said, and I probably would have allowed you to take Cerberus straight away and easily, even on those words alone. But as I owe you a favour, I will give you a hint about how to catch the dog. And you are welcome to take him if you can wrestle him bare hand. And Hades then told Persephone how the guts of the Duke of Athens was now at his command, and all hell laughed. And Hercules laughed. Now, he knew not to eat or to drink, but he sat then with the Lord of the underworld, pretending to eat and to drink with him. And the Lord was satisfied with him and said, "Oh, Hercules, you are a one, for you have conquered even I, death. Take then Cerberus, lead him only in moonlight, for if he sees the sun, he will be filled with such madness that even you will not be able to hold him back." And Persephone gave him then, Hercules, a lead and a set of eyeglasses that could be put over a dog if you had held him down, so that he might not see the light. And she said, "Before you do it, I must go and greet the hound." And she went then to Cerberus, and Hercules followed her. And Persephone greeted her friend the dog, and for a while they were enjoyed together. And then Persephone said, "Bring him back safe," and was gone. And then Hercules made to grab Cerberus, but Cerberus was having none of it. He jumped nimbly aside, and his 3 great heads reared, and he reared up upon his back legs, and he put his claws in Hercules, and Hercules struggled, but here was a creature stronger than a titan and nobler than a god, and backwards and forwards there in the Styx they struggled, for if Cerberus couldn't wet Hercules' legs, he would be as one lost. And Hercules felt his strength ebb and ebb and ebb, and he followed a trick Hermes had whispered to him, to remember always the light of the sun. And as he remembered the rising sun at dawn, he felt his strength return, and Cerberus lessened and lessened, but once again the valiant hound struck again. And once again Hercules, thrown back, remembered rosy-fingered dawn. 3 times Cerberus struck him, once for each head, 3 great bites that would remain upon his face until the day he was brought to heaven. But each time Hercules did not abandon hope, did not use weapons, but came back with his fingers, until at last even the hound of hell was tired. And when it was tired, it fell back, and Hercules, taking the last gift of Persephone, a chew, offered it to Cerberus. And Cerberus came up and proffered his head, and Hercules put the glasses upon him, and then very quietly led Cerberus away, up through the layers of hell, and coming upon the world at dark, leading him only by moonlight, hiding always in caverns, whispering the songs of the dead to him, that he might feel at home. He felt Persephone's breath on him, as if she accompanied her beloved hound. Step by step they went, until at last they came to Tiryns, and in the dark of the moon, Cerberus came into the hall, and there was the tyrant, saying, "Hey, what? You're back? Have you done it? Is this some trickery?" And Hercules revealed the hound. And when the hound saw the tyrant of Tiryns there, sitting in the hall, there was no holding the creature back, but with each of its 3 heads, it bit down and down and down. Two of his sons, and Hercules laughed. All night long, Hercules and the hound feasted in the hall that was ruined, and under the hell light of the hound, the very stones of Tiryns quaked, as if 1,000 years had passed in that one night. So it stood for a long while ruined. And then, as dawn came, Hercules took the hound to a cave, and in that cave he saw once again the Dark Kingdom. For all the while Hades and his Persephone, king and queen, had followed the hero, watching after their hound. And they called the dog then, and he came, and they were gone. And Hercules stood as a man released from fate, there in the dark cave nearest to Tiryns, free at last to adventure where he will. Now, hearing that tale, do you not see? In Hercules I achieved so much: the overthrow of a tyrant, the freedom of Prometheus, allowing Diana to clear up those messes she is prone to in her enthusiasm, teaching men the power of gods. You might say it is a kink in my nature to favour men from time to time, but always, I tell you, as I favour them, the world is enriched and grows, and men learn again of the beauty and the power, not just of the gods, but of this world. The gods and they do share.